Okay, so everybody should be able to see the sources online. If you don't, please do let me know. Um, and hopefully this is our middle step, trying to get back to pre-pandemic situation in which we're inside with a full breakfast. So today, for those who are here, we are outside on my deck, and we have excellent breakfast put together by Leora and my kids, of course. But we don't have quite all the staples that we're used to. But hopefully next time we'll be back to that. Okay, so it is Memorial Day, and given that fact, I wanted to go back to the National Jewish Welfare Board and the various questions that were asked by chaplains to the committee of Responsa. And we'll talk a little bit about we'll review again about that. And hopefully I really did try to avoid Aguna, given that we've been talking about Aguna quite a lot. However, I was not totally successful, only somewhat successful. So we'll talk about Aguna just a little bit, and then we'll go and we'll talk about Yahrtzeit as well. So just to review, the National Jewish Welfare Board was created right after the United States joined World War I in order to support Jewish soldiers in the U.S. military. They would recruit and train chaplains and provide them with materials that were necessary for their jobs, as well as supporting individual soldiers. All of that, the National Jewish Welfare Board is now the Jewish Welfare Board, Jewish Chaplaincy Council, and is part of the JCC of North America. And again, they still do the similar work and send supplies to Jews in the military for holidays and so on and so forth. They set up, the National Jewish Welfare Board did, a military chaplaincy agency called the Commission of Army and Navy Religious Activities, CANRA, which existed from 1942 to 1947. And in 1942, they set up a committee on Responsa. Now, the committee on Responsa, of course, had representatives from all the major Jewish streams of Judaism. Each individual was great in their own right. From the Orthodox side, it was Rabbi Dr. Leo Young, who got his smicha from Rav David Tzvi Hoffman in Hildesheimer Seminary, and of course was the rabbi of the Jewish Center in New York City, and lived from 1892 to 1987. Dr. Milton Steinberg, who of course was representing Jewish Theological Seminary, and of course wrote a driven leaf and at least one or two other books. He's a rabbi of Park Avenue Synagogue, and unfortunately died very young. He died when he was 43 in 1950. And Rav Solomon B. Freehold, who was the great Reform rabbi in Pittsburgh, the president of the CCAR, Rabbi Rodev Shalom, and wrote a book called The Responsa Literature, and lived from 1892 to 1990. So these were the three individuals who made up the Committee on Responsa. Again, each one great in their own right and certainly knowledgeable about Jewish history and Jewish tradition. And they were addressed with the following question. So going to the first source. A chaplain asks, what date is to be observed as Yahrtzeit when a man is declared officially dead, but no trace of remains is found and no accurate date of when he was missing is available? He was lost during a battle of several days' duration. Okay, so we have a question from a chaplain, presumably in the field. A Jewish soldier had unfortunately been missing and declared dead, and we don't know when he died. We don't know whether the person died in battle. The battle itself lasted for a number of days. We don't know, perhaps maybe the person languished, unfortunately, and died later. Maybe the person was captured and eventually died. We really have no idea. So what do we do for the day of Yahrtzeit when we don't know the day of death of an individual? So this is the answer that was given, and we'll go through some of the sources that they quote, and then some additional sources that actually seem to have come around the same time, having to do with World War II. The main question which we are asked is, which day shall be observed as Yahrtzeit when the date of the death is not known? Okay, that is the question. The question is complicated by the fact that although the man is officially declared dead by the reports of the government, no trace of their remains can be found, and the observance of mourning is involved with the question of the right of the wife to remarry. Okay, so the Responsa Committee is rightfully pointing out that, hold on a second, before deciding what day he died, let's decide whether he's actually dead. And just because the government declares someone dead does not necessarily mean that we take the government at its word. Where's the proof? Where are the witnesses? Where's the remains? We have no evidence whatsoever, besides the government say so, that the person is dead. So is that sufficient? And of course, the the genre or the area in which we generally try to resolve this question is with respect to aguna. Okay, now we're going to see this particular soldier wasn't married, so we're not worried about this person's wife. However, in order to explore the halachic scenarios in which we're trying to decide whether or not someone can be declared dead. So the right place for that is with respect to aguna. So going on, thus Turei Zahav in Shulchan Aruch and Yoredea 375 number 7 declares that there should be no forms of mourning for a man who is drowned in the sea, inasmuch as the ceremonies of mourning would be taken by some to indicate that the wife is permitted to remarry. Okay, so here the Taz, and we'll see this actually goes before the Taz, we'll see in a second, but there is a connection that seems or perhaps cannot be broken between mourning, meaning Avelos, and perhaps and Yahrtzeit and all the laws of Avelos, Shiva and Shloshim and so on and so forth, and Aguna itself. Namely, we don't want people to be mourning and not allow the woman to remarry. Okay, those two go together, because once we say that the children, for example, can sit shiva, and the wife can sit shiva, and the children can start saying kaddish, that implicitly declares that the person is dead. That would imply that the wife should be able to remarry, but that's not necessarily the case. And what is the ultimate situation in which we have this question? When someone drowns in the sea. So that's the case of Ma'im She'en Lahem Sof, which we touched upon in our Wednesday class. Ma'im She'en Lahem Sof is a situation in which somebody drowns in water that we can't see the ends. Okay, so someone drowns in a swimming pool. God forbid, again, someone goes into a swimming pool and doesn't come up, so we can assume that the person is dead because we're in the world where the person goes. There's only one way down, right? However, if someone dies in an ocean, well, maybe the person resurfaced, maybe the person caught onto a board or a raft or something, and the fact that we don't see that person is not indicative that the person is dead. It's just indicative that we don't see the person, but maybe the person is actually alive. Because that's Ma'im She'en Lahem Sof. Water that doesn't have an end, meaning we can't see beyond the horizon, and maybe the person is actually there. Maybe the person is alive and well. So here it quotes the Beis Yosef. So they say, see also Joseph Caro on the Torah Ibid. So that's the Beis Yosef, which is the first Hebrew source. He says, because of the Itur, Ba'oz Kuf, B'Shem Chuvas Rif. So the Itur quotes the Rif. Mi shetava b'mayim she'en lahem sof, ein heter le'ishto. Okay, so someone who drowns in water that has no end, the woman is stuck, right? We can't declare the person dead because maybe he in fact was able to survive, and therefore the woman is stuck. Okay, now that's what the Rif says. Okay, the Rif says that the woman can't remarry, and also the children can't yarshin. Right? The children can't inherit the assets of this individual. Okay. On that, the Itur says, the Rif doesn't say those words, but the Itur says, therefore we assume that person has a chazaka, this person is presumed alive because we can't declare the person dead. So then the stavra de lo nehiga avilusa, and so therefore, if we're assuming that the person is alive, so we can't start the avelus process. We can't start the mourning process. But we have this brayson in Eva Rabasi that suggests that someone who drowns in a river or drowns in or falls into the sea then asks, when do we start counting? In terms of various laws of Avelos, so that occurs after we give up checking, right? We've checked, we give up. Okay, then Avelos, then mourning starts. So Lamemer, that means Shenafel Lames. That's when we know the guy is dead. Or the person died in a swimming pool, or some other situation where the water does have an end. Okay, so that's where we can start declaring avelos and start the mourning process. However, without that, we have to assume that the person is still alive, and therefore no mourning would be appropriate. Okay, any questions there? All right, yeah, Nathaniel, go ahead. Okay, so that's an excellent question. So the superficial answer is no. Okay, there's no time period in which we start saying the person is dead. Okay, so officially that's going to take us like a year or so in our Wednesday night class to try to answer that question, because that is an important question. There is a Tosfos Rav Lezer Miverdun who does give a time limit of either 4 or 7 years and says that after that point you can declare a person dead. That opinion is rejected by every other Rishon in the entire world. However, when we have some ability to when we have some evidence that the person is dead, so we'll then invoke this one opinion and say, okay, well, we have some evidence that he's dead, and now he hasn't showed up, and so therefore we can declare the person dead. And basically, what happens is, as modern in modern times, as communications is much more advanced and much quicker, so then that logic becomes much stronger. Right. So the fact that you haven't heard somebody for a year and the person has a cell phone and the person has email and the person has, okay, that's really saying something, as opposed to not having heard from a year. And the only way to actually get letters back and forth is by camel. Right. So it's a good question, an important question, and one that requires a lot more analysis. But okay. So continuing then, the Responsa Committee says as follows. In fact, even if the man who is drowned in the sea is an unmarried man, and the question of the remarriage of a wife is therefore not involved. Okay, so if the person's not married, then there's no issue of aguna. Right? So let's say, maybe you should say, okay, if there's no aguna, let the children start the avelus process. Let them start mourning, because we're not worried about a wife remarrying, when the person is still alive. There is no wife. He's not married. So even so, no forms of mourning should be observed for him. See Greenwald Achletzara, page 235, note 15. Okay, which is what's here. Okay, so Rav Greenwald, who we're talking about, is Rav Yekusiel Yehuda Greenwald, who was the rabbi for many years, I think about 30 years, in Columbus, Ohio. His most famous work is the Kolbo on Avelus, okay, which is about 3 volumes. But apparently before that, he wrote another work on Avelus called Achletzara. Okay, so this was basically a guide to Avelus, to the laws of mourning, as is Kolbo al Avelus, but which was later. And for many years, for decades, this was the book on Avelus. Now there are a couple of other ones. There's Pnei Baruch, but Rav Greenwald's work is still extremely important, especially since he was on the American scene and is dealing with that community. Rav Greenwald was again a very well-known figure, certainly in Columbus and around the United States as a whole. He was a professor for a while when he was in Europe. He wrote biographies of various gedolim, not like hardcore biographies, like real biographies. He wrote history. He lectured. He was. So some of them are more accurate than others. So we'll put it that way. And again, and this was all despite the fact that he actually barely spoke English. Nonetheless, he was again a well-known and remembered rabbi. There's a book which I should have brought outside on the history of the Columbus community, and Rav Greenwald, of course, is spoken with many superlatives in that work. So this is the specific footnote that they're quoting here on the bottom of page 1, and he says, "Afilu achar yush." Okay, so we're talking about, again, after the person's given up, after it's been given up, we have not been able to find the remains of this person. What do we do in terms of mourning, of the mourning process? So he says, we even after we've given up, we do not start the mourning process, because we're concerned about his wife. And I should scroll down. Oh, good point. Thank you, Tamima. Okay, there we go. We're scrolling down. Okay, hopefully everybody can see the sources now. So again, as we said before, if the person is married, so then we can't start the mourning process, because the woman has not yet been given permission to remarry. But with respect to someone who's not married, the lechach shashaguna hayim nisablu. But what about when we don't have a concern of aguna, we don't have a concern of the woman? Can we start the mourning process with less evidence than we would to allow the woman to remarry? So Rav Greenwald says as follows: Mimishmos hashach b'simin shin ayin hey sifkan zayin u'mimaharam ben chaviv bezrat Hashem. Okay, so you can look up all these sources. So mashma from those 2 sources, it implies shashfilu b'ravak she'ein chashaguna gam kein ein misablin. No, it's equal, right? Even in the case where there's no wife, right? We're dealing with someone who's unmarried. Still, we won't start the mourning process until we have sufficient evidence that the person is dead. וכן כתוב בספר גור אריה הלוי בשם Zion בשם שי למורה בשאר האחרונים. Okay, so you have a bunch of achronim who agree with that. אכן בתשובה שבוס יעקב חלק א' סימן קוף ג'. However, in the Shvus Yaakov, he says as follows: Pshitale, it's obvious to him the Baravak misablin lefi she'en chashash, that if the person is unmarried, then you can start the mourning process, because what does it hurt? There's no concern. We'll get back to this Shvus Yaakov hopefully a little bit later. In that case, he's talking about someone who is married, and the rabbi of the town, I guess, of where this occurred, where this person went missing, and now the wife is there. So the rabbi had said to start the mourning process, even though the woman was not yet permitted to remarry from the perspective of Aguna, and the Shvus Yaakov was not at all happy about this psak and gave it to this rabbi. So therefore, and therefore the Chassam Sofer says that one who is stringent and decides to start the mourning process, so then we don't speak against that person. With Binyan Sion Sim Kuf Chafal, then he quotes the Binyan Sion. So Nishal al Rava Kim Ha'imlis Abel. So we have the same question with respect to a unmarried person who went missing. Can the mourning process start, even though we don't have so much evidence that we would have allowed his wife to remarry? So he says, Amnam im hanitzva haya panoi. He says if the person who drowned, that was the case over there, was not married. So Zetalia beplukta Maharam ben Chaviv be'ezras nashim. So again, according to Maharam ben Chaviv, we say that we make a gzera to a gzera, we make a decree to a decree, and since if he was married, we wouldn't allow the mourning process to start out of concern of the wife and of the wife remarrying, and therefore we don't, even if the person's unmarried. That's the opinion of the Maharam ben Chaviv. Uven Hashvus Yaakov Delo Gazrinan. He argues with Shvus Yaakov again, who he just quoted, who says that we would allow the unmarried person we would allow the mourning for the unmarried person. The Chassam Sofer agrees that the mourning process should start, and therefore that's what we should do. Okay, and then you can look at the other achronim there. Going on to the next paragraph, he says, Uviyalkot Yosef Shnas Yitzayin Sim Lamches. So Nistapek, again, they have the question there. B'mish Nitzva B'mayim Shein L'hem Sof. So someone who passes away, or we think passes away, because the person drowned in water that has no end, drowned in an ocean, or some other issue of death, again, which is not clear. And again, there the person is married. So we don't start the mourning process. But then the woman passes away. Okay, so the wife passes away. Maybe she's so distraught of the fact of her husband, or of the loss of her husband, but whatever it is, the woman passes away, and now there's no concern anymore that the woman will remarry, because she's passed away as well. So he goes through a whole thing here. And at the end of the day, he says that in such a case, the mourning process can indeed start. Okay. So again, what we see from here is that we have this question. Again, before we even try to figure out what day the Yahrtzeit is, we have to ask, can we say that the person is dead, right? And so again, if we have unclear circumstances as to when the person died, even if he is unmarried, we have an open question as to whether the mourning process should start. Okay, so the Chassam Sofer and the Binyan Sion, so they say the mourning process should start. So presumably that's the way we paskin. But the situation is not so simple. Okay, so turning down, let's stop there for a moment. Any questions? Yeah. Well, oh yes, we're gonna move down. Thank you, Tzvima. If you're online, I don't see you. So if you have any questions, you should please speak up. No, that's okay. Okay. So going on then to page 2. However, in all these matters of the reliability of the official report of death, the CANRA, okay, and then again, that's the committee, what does it stand for again? The Commission on Army and Navy Religious Activities. Okay, so in all these sorts of situations, the CANRA has decided in a previous responsum, based chiefly upon the responsive of Moses Sofer, that the government report should be accepted. And as for the final determination of death by a Beth Din, the CANRA decides to leave that to each individual family and their rabbi. Okay, so the CANRA was smart. Okay, the CANRA said, in general, it seems that we can rely on the government when the government declares somebody dead. And we'll see that does seem to be the opinion of the Chassam Sofer, and that seems to be the generally accepted opinion, that an official statement from a government is accepted as as evidence for death. However, any specific issue should be left to each individual family and their rabbi, which is the Canra's way of saying we don't want to touch this because this might be a discussion depending on what stream of Judaism you come from, and therefore we're going to leave it up to you. It's again showing their intelligence. While this matter of remarriage is not directly concerned in the main question which we were asked concerning Yahrtzeit, okay, again, presumably the person's not married, nevertheless, it is involved in it, and it is important to mention it in this responsa. Okay, and so the committee on responsa is, again, being responsible and noting that, yes, the question is Yahrtzeit, but you should know that there's these assumptions built in, which should be stated. Okay, so the Chassam Sofer, which they're talking about, is then the source on page 2. Okay, let's read the question because it's interesting in and of itself. So She'ela, here's the question: Ish echad Yehudi me'anshei hatzava. Okay, so we have a Jewish soldier. Okay, we're going to see this is 1809. All right, so we have a Jewish soldier. The Chassam Sofer is in Hungary. All right, so we have Jewish soldiers from Hungary in 1809, right, which it seems to be. I assume I was trying to figure out. I assume it's the Napoleonic Wars. That is the time period. So we have Jewish soldiers already at that time. And his wife hasn't heard from him in a long time. Because of so the father-in-law, his father, meaning the person's father-in-law, so the wife's father, writes to one of the officers in the army to try to figure out what happened to his son-in-law. Okay, and again, this is also really interesting, right? This officer is not Jewish, as we'll see. Okay, but this father-in-law knows one of the top officers in the army, which is actually pretty interesting. Uvan chuvaso ki kvar meis. Okay, so he gets an answer that the person unfortunately passed away. Yom Chavtes October 1810 lemisparam. Okay, October 29th, 1810. Kvar nichtav ksav misa shekorin Kettenschein shemeis belemberg. He said there was already an official statement that on this day, right, they have exactly the day, there was this official statement that this person died in Lemberg. And the person writes further, right? There's no question about it. It's that this happened. It was definitely the son-in-law of this Rav Daniel. Hanikra label, okay, the husband's name was Label. Sherhaya Eitzel Boule regiment. Okay, that's where he was. He was in this specific regiment. Okay, so that's the first letter. Here's letter number 1. Shuv achar zeh chakru od. So then they looked further. The hisig chamiv Rav Daniel michtav to tension imakum gavoa. Okay, so then this Rav Daniel, okay, again, the father-in-law, who's now worried about his daughter, obviously, got an official letter from a very high place, General Commander. Okay, he actually got it from a general, which is also pretty interesting. V'sham ne'amar shemeis label Shmuel yimakom ploni, that label Shmuel from this place, v'galil ploni, from this area, b'medinas Hagar in Hungary, v'hayanaso isha, and he was married, v'hayehudi, and he was Jewish, umeis ben chaf beis shana, and he died. He was 22 years old. Yom Yud Gimel October 1810 misparam. He died on 13th October 1809. No. So the thing was written in 1810. Right. So before the thing was written in 1810, and then but the date of death was declared 1809. Okay. The Pelachipal. Which is a field. He died in a field hospital. What? A field hospital. Bell Spital. Beld? Oh, field. Oh, got it. Oh, I missed that one. Okay, very good. So in the field hospital. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Ira. Okay, so he died in the field hospital. Hanikra Pester Feld Chipal. Okay, this specific one. V'chalach Koli Me'ayim. And he died from some sort of intestinal or stomach sickness. Uvames, okay. V'shayin hazeh hayak derech hashayin halalu. And this specific document was like all other documents. Shatovitz hayasoy b'tfus. Okay, that the that there was it was a form letter. I mean, the Tofes is the form part. Okay, that's that Torah nichta v'nechta misari hachayov Lemberg, and then the important part, which is an actual signature from the soldiers in Lemberg. Okay, and this was copied from the official book of all the people who died and all the people who are alive of the army. Okay, so you can't get more detailed than that, right? You got exactly how the person died. You got his age. He says that he's married. He says that he's Jewish. You have the dates, right? So this is all very official. Shoshuv Heid Rav Shmaya Mibanvitz. Okay, then we have additional testimony. The Chipsu Eitzel General Commander Acher. No, I guess this was the father. So he asked a different general. And he showed him the official book, which the person's name was erased, in which shows that he died. Oh, sorry. Okay, so this Rav Shmaya Bibanovitz was looking for his own son, and he saw that he died. And while he was looking at the book, he saw that Rav Daniel's son-in-law also died. His name was also erased. So now we're trying to figure out whether this poor woman can remarry. Okay, so we see that the Hungarian army was very careful with their records and tried to have everything down, and that the Jews had enough connections that they were able to write to the highest levels of the army and actually get answers. Okay, so that's the question. And at the end of the day, the Chassam Sofer says, okay, you might say, hold on a sec, these are all non-Jews. And they were asking an explicit question. And we know that with respect to Aguna, a non-Jew can testify, but not formally, right? So we need the non-Jew to at least instigate the conversation or something of that sort and say that the person is dead. And here there was a direct question, which would seem to contradict that. Nevertheless, because it's an official government document and the government wouldn't lie to its citizens, it would look bad on them. That would be a terrible thing. And therefore, the Chassam Sofer says this statement is acceptable. Okay, and therefore this poor woman is allowed to remarry. So again, Kenra then is properly quoting the Chassam Sofer and saying, listen, the Chassam Sofer already declared any official document from a government as acceptable, and so therefore the American government as well. And if the American government says the person is missing and declared dead, then the person is dead. Okay. Okay. So any questions at that part? Okay. So they're now cutting trees or something in our neighbor's backyard, so it's a little bit louder, but hopefully everybody can hear me. So now, as to the main question, namely, when should Yahrtzeit be observed, since the date of death is not specifically known? Okay, so what do we do? So in the case of tidings of death, okay, either Shmua Krova or Shmua Rechoka, we're going to define all those in a minute. The date when the tidings are received is the important date. Okay, so again, when we're going back to a time where we don't have instantaneous communications, so there's a time delay between when somebody passes away and when the relatives find out. So that could be either Shmua Krova, meaning that you hear about the death within 30 days, or Shmua Rechoka, meaning you don't hear about it within 30 days, you only hear about it after 30 days. Thus, when the report of death comes, the mourning begins from the time the report came. In the case of a close report, okay, Shmua Krova, meaning you hear the person hears within 30 days, the mourner counts the 30 days from the day that he got the report, since the principle is that the day of the tidings, Shmua Krova, is legally equivalent to the date of burial. Okay, and that's with respect to Shmua Krova. Again, someone hears that they lost a relative and the death happened within the past 30 days. So for all halakhic purposes, the day that the person hears about it, that is equivalent to the day that of burial, and all avelos, all laws of mourning start at that point. Okay, so here, I mean, for the Shulchan Aruch, but the Aruch HaShulchan, just he says, I think, a little bit more clearly. So he says, again, someone who receives news, unfortunately, he lost a relative that he has to mourn for. If he receives the news within 30 days of the person's death, so if you biyom lamed atzmo, even if it's on day 30, that is considered a close hearing, right? Shmua krova, v'chayiv linog shiva u'shloshim yom hashmua, and the person has to go through the mourning process with shiva and with shloshim from that day that he hears the korea, and he has to do kriya, has to rip his garments. But also b'tefillin b'yom harishon, and he's not permitted to wear tefillin on the day that he hears. Umavrin also, and the person goes through the ritual meal that happens after the burial. The asr b'tisboris lamid yom yom hashmua, and the person is not allowed to get a haircut within 30 days for the 30 days after he hears. Kol shedavar yom shmua kiyom kfura. Right, the law is that the day the person hears is equivalent in all halachic aspects to the day the person was buried. Okay, so that seems pretty straightforward. So that's what happens in a shmua krova, and then going on, the camera says, so in the case of a distant report, shmua rechoka, which is the case referred to us. Okay, so in this case, again, they didn't find out about death so much longer. So what happens then? So the 1 hour of mourning takes place on the day that the report came, and the 30 days of mourning for a father or mother begin with the day that the tidings came. Okay, so in that case, there is effectively no shiva, right? So there is 1 hour, one moment of shiva, where the person has to do something that resembles shiva, taking off shoes, right, or sitting on the floor, or whatever it is. But that's only, again, really for a moment. And then what kicks in is we'll see in a second what kicks in. So here he suggests that the shloshim kicks in, and we'll see a year kicks in, but not quite the way it's said here, according to the Aruch HaShulchan. It says at the bottom of page 2. I have to go down. Sorry. All right, bottom of page 2. Okay, however, it's 30 days pass, right? And now it's even if it's just the next night, so stay 31. It's a mikvi shmua rechoka. That's not shmua krova anymore. That's a shmua rechoka. It's a far tidings. And then the avelus with respect to shiva only applies for a moment, for an hour. And again, it doesn't mean an hour. Right? It's not an hour as in 1/24th of the day. That's not what it is. Just some time period. Below called dina avelus, and the person doesn't have to observe every law of shiva. Just is a pratme avelus, shakala is the one thing that demonstrates mourning for one moment. The ein chiluk, going on to page 3. The ein chiluk ben shama b'yom l'shama b'layla. It doesn't matter what the person heard during the day, the person heard at night. The filu shama b'layla. Okay, so and so on. So skip the rest of that source. Then the Aruch HaShulchan goes on and explains exactly what the dinim are with respect to shmua rechoka. V'od yesh chiluk. The b'sharei krovim b'shmua rechoka noig sha achas b'shuv ein alav shum din avelos. Okay, so if it's respect to another relative, namely not a parent, so shloshim is already passed, right? So basically, the person is noeg. The person observes one thing, one issue, one aspect of mourning, and finished. Okay, but what about parents? So parents is a whole different story. So now again, shloshim has passed, but there are all sorts of laws of mourning for parents that don't rely on shloshim, that go beyond shloshim. Kamal l'saper, for example, getting a haircut, the asr actually right, as opposed to other relatives, the law of not getting a haircut by mourning for a parent is until his friends tell him, listen, you look horrible. Okay, it's not shloshim. It's longer than that. Shalom, greeting someone, going to a wedding, all these things that are not permitted for 12 months. So this applies even if the person didn't hear until after 30 days. Okay, so with respect to the laws that have to do with shloshim, so those are all passed. Right? However, any law that applies 12 months or that is not tied to shloshim, that still applies when someone hears about a parent. And in that case, you're going to count from the day of actual death as opposed to the day of hearing. Okay, when it comes to shmua rechoka. Okay. Okay, so fine. Well, we can skip the rest of it. Again, that's the difference between a shmua krova and a shmua rechoka. A shmua krova, if someone hears again about the death of a relative, God forbid, within 30 days, so then all laws of avelus apply. The person sits shiva and then observes shloshim. just as if it was the day of burial. With respect to Shmur Rechoka, which 30 days have already passed. So again, then it depends on what type of relative it is. If it's a non-parent, so then basically everything's done. The person observes one aspect of a velus for a moment, and that's it. And then with respect to parents, anything not attached to shloshim, such as going to a wedding, and presumably saying kaddish, and all those issues would still apply, counting from the date the person actually died. Okay. So now that we've identified all of those different aspects that we need to know in order to decide what halacha is, the committee on responsa tells us, since therefore it is clear that the day of receiving the report has the status of the day of actual burial. Okay, so we see that the day receiving of getting the news is important. Certainly with respect to Shmua Krova, right? Certainly with respect to hearing within 30 days. And even though this case is not within 30 days, still, presumably that day has some importance. That is the only date he has for the Yahrtzeit in succeeding years, and therefore that is the day that should be kept for Yahrtzeit, the day the person hears about it, if they don't know the day the person died. And that's where this response ends. Interestingly, this is not the only this is not the only committee. This is not the only halachic responsa on this issue, which comes to the exact same conclusion, though it doesn't seem that the two actually knew each other. So this question of not knowing goes back to the Mate Moshe. Okay, the Mate Moshe is Reb Moshe ben Avraham Mat, who was born in Poland in 1551 and was a student of the Maharshal. And the Maharshal and the Ramah lived at in the same time period. And Rav Moshe died in 1606. So that's the time period that we're talking about during Poland's heyday, before, slightly before the Chmielnicki massacres. So, and he tells us, "Misha eno yodea eze yom hu yom shemeis bo avivu imo." We don't know what day someone doesn't know the day one of their parents died. So Horali Mora Maharash Zal. So he says the Maharshal tells us, "Livra yom yimiyuchad yisanebov yomer kaddish." Okay, the person should choose a day. That should be the day that they fast, according to the custom that one fasts on the Yahrtzeit of a parent, and that is the day the person should say kaddish. However, if there's someone else who's saying kaddish, and again, in those days they only had one person saying the kaddish yasom, the kaddish for orphans, so therefore you got to choose a different day, right? Because you can't take the place of someone who definitely knows that their parent died on that day. Yeah. Correct. Then you're good. Correct. That's what it would seem. Right. So if you know the date, however you learn that information, right? So that would be the right time. Right.
Yaakov.
Wait 1 second, Rama. So do you not hear the question? Okay.
Yes, that's right. We can hear the questions, right?
Okay, I apologize. Okay, so I'll just ask, if you know the date from a report, when you get the report, and the report is that the person died on this and this date, even if it's from the government, so that date is assumed to be the Yahrtzeit. Yeah, and correct. The Yahrtzeit would be observed in right. So exactly what you do with that first year of that first year is always a big. So that's the truth. That's a question even in a typical case where the funeral is delayed even a day or two, right? So you still have that. You have that same question. So that is a huge discussion amongst the poskim. I don't know what the current custom is. Maybe somebody knows exactly what they do. Did they do the day for the first Yahrtzeit? Do you do the day of burial or do you do the day of death? I mean, after the first Yahrtzeit, it's definitely the day of death. Yeah. It certainly depends who you ask. There's a huge discussion about this. Okay. So we have evidence from Dr. Birnbaum that the first Yahrtzeit they did date of burial. Okay. With day of death. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so yeah. Correct. So then you have a time issue there as well. Okay, good. So Dr. Birnbaum was telling us that good Hasidic Jews for the first Yahrtzeit do day of burial, and then there's some Litvaks who unfortunately even some not so good. Okay, and, and then he said that the Lithuanian custom he feels is that they do day of death. But he correctly points out that it does depend on how long the delay is, right? So even nowadays, sometimes you have delays of more than just a couple of days. You can have delays of a week if someone has to get in or whatever for whatever reason there is or medical reasons. So then this becomes again a whole nother issue, and then maybe you would keep maybe you would keep burial instead of, you'd be more akin to keep burial because you have issues of other you have other halachic issues. So, for example, going to a wedding, right? So, going to a wedding in the middle of that time period would be could be a problem. Okay, yeah, good, yeah, right, yeah. First day of Pesach. Okay, okay, hmm, okay, okay, right, okay. So got it, got it. Right. Okay. So Dr. Birnbaum is noting that that his father and his aunt and uncles, for their parents, kept the first day of Pesach as Yahrtzeit because they were definitely alive until Pesach, but did not survive too much after that, though it's not clear exactly when they died. And so that's the day they chose. Okay. So that's that seems somewhat in line with again with the Matei Moshe here. It says choose a day. Okay, when you have, we'll see again. We didn't go through. We're not going to go through everything here, but when you have an general idea as to when the person died, so then maybe there are ways to choose one way or another, like Ira's father did. So then obviously you should choose a day. You don't choose a random day. Choose a day that makes sense, and that comes into play also. Yes. Ah, right. Right. Yes, then you would change. Good. Okay. So Leroy's just asking if you choose a day and then you realize that the day was wrong. Okay, and you could realize it was wrong because chances are you'll choose the wrong day, but you could realize it was wrong because someone actually tells you no, it happened on this day. And you actually have evidence of the day, or you can kind of constrict it, and maybe you heard that the person died within a specific month. So then yes, then you would go. Then it seems you would go and change it, which is again, we want to choose one day because it's important, obviously, to commemorate parents, and we'll see. There's actually okay. Actually, I didn't go through the sources here. So two of the reasons that are given for why one observes the Yahrtzeit is either because that day is considered a negative day, that either has bad luck or just generally bad tidings for children, because unfortunately, obviously, terrible tragedy happens to them on that day. So that's one reason that's given for Yahrtzeit. Another reason that's given is in order to help get kapara, in order to help, as it were, for repentance for the person who died. And then either way, obviously repentance is always good. So that goes without saying. And generally, what the poskim seem to say is that even if you're concerned that that day is a bad omen for the person, so you try to at least say, okay, well, I'm going to take that bad omen from wherever it is, and I'm just going to stick it here. And this is what I'm going to choose. Kind of have to like make it up, like making up a fast day. That's how the poskim that's how some of the poskim look at it. But either way, it seems important to try to. It is important to have a day in which to commemorate Yahrtzeit. Okay, so the Matei Moshe says again, if you have absolutely no information whatsoever, it says the Maharshal Paskins that choose a day, right? Choose whatever day it is. If you're going to fast, you may want to choose one during the winter, but he doesn't say that you should do that. Okay, but where we actually have a little bit more information is from this Shuvas-based Mordechai. This is Rav Mordechai Fogelman, who I admit I had not heard of before, who was born in 1899 and was the Rav in Katowice, Poland, before escaping to Israel in World War II. And he became in Israel. He became the rabbi of Kiryat Motzkin, which is right outside of Haifa. And he's now dealing with the question of the Holocaust. Now, the chief rabbinate, and he'll quote this, the chief rabbi declared a Yom Kaddish Lakol, right? A day of Kaddish for anybody who doesn't know. When they lost a relative, they declared Asar B'Teves as the day for everybody to say Kaddish. And they did so with the rationale is Asar B'Teves, which again was the day that was the day that the siege of Jerusalem began, right, for destruction prior to the destruction of the temple, and that was the beginning of the tragedy of the biggest tragedy in Jewish history. I shouldn't say biggest or not biggest, but a very big tragedy of Jewish history. And the Holocaust, which has, which again is a tragedy, perhaps on the level of the loss of the Beis Mikdash. So then, therefore, people saying Kaddish should say it on the day in which that process started. That was the rationale of the chief rabbinate. The Rabbi Unterman stated it explicitly. He was when he was chief rabbi. And Rav Fogelman is going to quote that, but first he goes through the questions. So let's take a look. So again, top of kind of middle of page 3. So milyonos achim v'achayos nifteru. Okay, so millions of our brothers and sisters have died. Nehergu v'nishmedu. They were killed. They were destroyed. B'machanos hashmada, in the camps. B'galus Europa, in Europe. B'shnos hashoah tafshin hey. During the Holocaust. B'yom umakom p'tirasam hamdiyakim en midoim. We don't know where they died. We don't know when they died. We don't know anything about it. V'savik gadol im ipam yivadu. And not only do we not know, it's not clear that we'll ever know, right? We might never know when these people died. So the yom yesh l'kvoa es yom hazikaron shelahem lamiras kaddish. So when do you commemorate the Yahrtzeit for these people? Okay. So tshuva it's tshuva. So the answer is as follows. His answer is as follows. Hashe'ela ena chadash. There's not a new question. Kimasika sapos k'machronim. Because this has been dealt with by the poskim, by the Achronim specifically. It's dealt with by the Marashal, by the Matamosha. They're talking about an individual who doesn't know when they lost the parents. But not with respect to this communal situation that we have, where we have millions of people died. We don't know when they died. Okay, so now he goes through. Hamat Moshe b'simin tafshin samach zayin. Posik b'shem Rabbah Marashal. This is what we saw. Misha in yodea is a yom who yom shemespo avivo imo. Right, someone doesn't know the day that to commemorate Yahrtzeit for the parents. So Hurli Maharash Zal. So Marashal says, Livra lo yom echad v'yisane bov yom kaddish. The person should choose a day and in order to fast, in order to say kaddish. Achem yesh yasum al yasik volvadai. However, if there's somebody else who's saying kaddish on that day, there's someone else who says Yahrtzeit on the day. So don't choose that day. Choose a different day. Okay, it's very muvam la'alach la'maseh b'magen Avram b'shulchan aruch arachaim sim tafkuf kasayin tafkuf samaches sifkan yitzayin. Okay, so this marashal is brought by the Magen Avram as well. Hashe'ela hi be'eze yom yesh livchor v'kvoa ki yom hashana lamiras kaddish. Okay, and the question is, what day do you choose? Okay, so you choose one day. Okay. So Harav Hagon Rav Hillel Posek Zal beha Posek Choveres Peidalet Sim Taf Taf Kuf Ayin. So he quotes this Rav Hillel Posek in a some sort of, I guess, journal called Haposek, which I wasn't able to find. It's not in Hebrew books. So nonetheless, he quotes him. So Omer, he says, Shim Yodim Es Yom HaHoledes Shalaniftar. If you know the day that the person was born, Azai Yesh L'Gvo Es Yom HaHoledes K'Yom HaPtira. You should choose the birthday as the Yahrtzeit. Okay, why should you choose the birthday as the Yahrtzeit? Anybody want to guess? Because Moshe Rabbeinu. Very good. Right? Why? Certainly, the people who perished in the Holocaust, these are kedoshim. These are holy people. They're certainly righteous people. And Hashem ends the years of tzaddikim, like we see by Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe was born in Zayin Adar. He dies in Zayin Adar, and therefore it makes sense that anyone killed in the Holocaust died on their birthday. That's quite a statement, but right, obviously they died on their birthday because they were tzaddikim too. Okay, so Davar Naya Amar. So Rav Fogelman says that's beautiful. That's beautiful. But there are klal. Einu nitan levitzua mitam rishonim. But come on, like really. Okay, that's beautiful. It's a nice drash. Is that really the day you should choose? Let's look a little. Let's look a little further. Okay. So Lefina is Dati. So Fogman says, okay, so what I think is Yish Kvoas Yom HaShmua. I don't know what the Zayin Aleph is for. Maybe Zayin Adar, maybe it's talking about a specific day, I'm not sure. But you should choose the day that you heard. Right? So as Hayom Bo Higia Hashmua, Leven Al Batira Sa'av, O Aim. Right? So the day that a person should choose as Yahrtzeit is the day the person heard about the death of one of his parents. That makes a lot of sense too, just like the committee on responses said. Right? Okay, so that should be the day that's chosen, the day the person heard. Okay, and there's proof from the Gemara on Yudches Amud Beis in Rosh Hashanah. Okay, so that's the Gemara is there on the left. I put it here because we actually talked about it between Mechal Mariv a couple of last week. But basically, they quote the Rav Shimon says there are 4 things that Rabbi Kiva is Doresh. Rabbi Kiva is Rav Shimon's Rebbe. So the 4 things Rabbi Kiva derived from Sukkim, where Rabbi Shimon says he disagrees. Okay, and it's this pasuk in Zechariah. Right? So the pasuk in Zechariah talks about Tzom HaRevi'in, Tzom HaChamishin, Tzom HaSiri, Tzom HaShvi'in, Tzom HaSiri. And Zechariah tells us that even though those days are tragic days because they were various parts of the tragedies leading up to the destruction of the first temple, during the second temple time period, these will be days of rejoicing, because we'll have the Beis Mikdash back. And so when we did this last week, we noted that Soma Asiri is Sara B'Tevis, and Soma Chamishi is Soma Revi'i is Shiva Sar B'Tammuz, Soma Chamishi is Tisha B'Av, right? Because that is the month. Okay. The problem is that that's not the order of the problem is that's the wrong order, right? It's the order of months. It's not the order of events. If you went by order of events, it should be Yom Chodesh. It should be Hasiri first, right? Because Sar B'Tevis should be first. So Reb Shimon doesn't like what Rabbi Kiva said. Instead, Reb Shimon redoes all of these months and shows you that that in fact it's chronological rather than by dates. Okay, so that's what Reb Shimon says. So going back then, so that's all on the left side over there. But going back to Rav Fogelman on the right, actually maybe you can see my cursor here. So we're going back over here. So he says, "V'somchim l'zayishim tzom Gemara sham shaninu." He quotes the Gemara, and then v'tosefta sota perek vav hagir. So then he quotes the Tosefta that says, "V'ni omer." This is Rav Shimon speaking. I say, "Som hachamishi zeh chamisha b'teves." Okay, that the Tzom HaChamishi means the 5th of Teves. El should be Yehuda misanin al Maseh v'gola al Shmua. Okay, in Judea they fasted the day that it happened, and in the Gola in Bavel they fasted the day that they heard. Okay, so according to the Tosefta, this tragedy, meaning the beginning of the siege, it was in Judea where they were there, so they commemorated the day that it started, and in the Gola in Bavel they commemorated the day they heard about it. So this seems to be an excellent proof that the day of Yahrtzeit, though obviously it's not Yahrtzeit here, but it's a fast day, but the day of Yahrtzeit should be commemorated as the day the person heard that it happened. Okay, so good. So very nice proof by Rav Fogelman. Okay, so then he goes through. Okay, it's 10:41. All right, see, so we'll just do this part quickly outside. He then goes through and asks, how can Rav Shimon argue on his Rebbe Kiva? Okay, this is not like just a very simple thing to do, but he gets out of it and it's fine. And he demonstrates how you are allowed to argue on your Rebbe as long as your Rebbe has given you permission to, be a posek. Okay, so we'll skip that one and we'll go to the top of page 4. Here we go. Okay, so going on the second line, says Brisa zo yochol l'shamish makor l'tshuva l'she'elasenu. So Rav Fogelman continues and says this Brisa, right? This is Tosefta and Sotar, the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, right? That can serve as a proof to answer our question. Re'inu shechurban hamikdash nikva lefi Reb Shimon yom hashmua yom hasreifa. With respect to the destruction of the Beis Mikdash, or the events surrounding the destruction, so the day that was heard was similar to the day that the tragedy actually happened. And this is what we should do nowadays as well with respect to the destruction of our people. The greatest of the tragedies that have occurred to the Jewish people. So So we should choose the day that we hear about it as the day of death. Klomar, meaning l'kvoa es hayom bo higia hashmua levenu levas al p'tirasam shala'av o shala'im. That the day that a son or a daughter hears about the death of their father or mother, that should be chosen as the day of Yahrtzeit. Kiyom ha'p'tir l'miras kaddish, and that should be for its respect to kaddish. U'liyom hazikaron hashnasim, for the Yahrtzeit in general. U'lezeh yesh bitu yishim nafshi u'mishpachti. And it says, this is what happened to me, right? K'muvan she'advarim amurim rak im hashmua higia le'em ishis. Okay, this is only if the this is only if they got news themselves, right, about their relative. Right, it's one thing to hear that someone's God forbid someone's parent died, right? That's what the case that we're talking about. You heard that your parent died. That is the day that should be kept then as your day, not the day. This was the day that a million people died. This is the day that this whole area was destroyed. Then it's different. So then the person should choose one day, right? So if you hear it in the general sense, if you hear about your specific relatives, then you choose that day. But if you hear about the Galil, you hear about the area was wiped out, so then you don't necessarily choose that day. You choose whatever day. Then you choose whatever day you want. So then he says, so that sort of case where you hear in a general sense, so then you should choose the 10th of Teves. Why? Because that was the day that was chosen by the chief rabbinate as the general day of Kaddish for all those who have passed away in the Holocaust who don't know the day of death. So bo anu omrim Kaddish b'rov am b'vatei knesses. So there we say Kaddish all together in the shuls. Right, to remember the millions of our brothers and sisters who were gathered in. Okay, right, so that's what he says. So again, at this point, it depends whether you hear about your specific relative, in which case you should choose the day of hearing as the day to commemorate the Yahrtzeit, or if you hear about it in a more general sense, so then follow what the chief rabbinate says, because there's something to be said about having everybody say Kaddish together. Okay. Any questions at that point? I haven't been stopping equally. I apologize. Okay, going on then to the next paragraph. So tshuva C hanisker le'el hi k'muvan gam liyachid b'shanim kitiknan she'enam yidum lo yom haptira shel aviv o imo. So he said you should, of course, this tshuva is generally applicable. Right? It's not only applicable to the Holocaust. It's just applicable. It's applicable to anybody who doesn't know when they lost their a parent. Like the Mata Moshe as we who quoted above. As Yom HaShmua Klomar, rather the day of hearing, meaning Yom Bo Higil Leven HaShmua P'tirasam, the day that the child heard about the death of a parent, Yesh L'Fiani Estaiti L'Gvoa Yom HaP'tira, that is the day that should be chosen as the Yahrtzeit. Yom HaZikaron HaShnasi Lamiras Kaddish, and therefore the day to say Kaddish every year. Ashivada Lo Yom HaP'tira. This is what you had said here. That should be chosen as the day of Kaddish until you hear otherwise, right? Until you hear about that maybe the death happened on a different day. The Kachanino Hake is, and then that's what I do. As Yom Chamisha Asar B'Av Yom HaShmua, I commemorate Yahrtzeit on the 15th of Av, which is the day I heard. Yom Bo No Dali Al P'tiras Adoni Avimo Rizal Be'er Sukkah. That's the day I heard about the death of my father, B'Shnas 1942. B'Lia Pratim Alashana. Without any, I had no one told me what day it was. So therefore, and therefore I've chosen that day to say Kaddish until I learn further about the day of his death. Okay, so that's what he says. So this is actually applied it to himself, and thank you, and therefore, and therefore and that's on again in abeyance until he learns more. But we see he actually acted on his own tshuva, which is always good to know. Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-mm. Because he heard about his father on a specific day, right? Correct. Correct. He heard about his father, right? No, because that was the day he heard. Right. Correct. Correct. He didn't hear that the city was wiped out. I mean, maybe he did, but he also heard that his father specifically was killed. So so he knows that they chose that day. A little bit so. So at the end, he quotes the Mahariel, and it's interesting that he quotes it. V'lomer Kaddish ve'eno yodea im aviv v'imo kayam. Different question. You say Kaddish, you don't know whether your parent is alive. Okay, so not that you don't know when the person died, you don't even know when they're alive. Medina right? So you don't have to. This nana maybe get right? Let's say someone sent as a messenger with a bill of divorce, and the husband is sick or very old. So no, you don't have to go and find out whether the husband is still alive before you give the give the bill of divorce. You assume that the person is alive. As long as the person hasn't reached gvuros, meaning 80. Okay, but Felix Gvuros, and even this person is that old, right? 80. This is not 80 nowadays. This is 80 in the not real. This is 80 in the 1300s. Okay, so even when the person does reach that age, you still can't say the person is definitely dead. You say we have to be stringent for both possibilities. Right? Since we don't know, and there are certainly people who do die and people who don't die, so we don't know. And you can't say that you can't allow a question to uproot what we know, which is that the person was alive. And therefore we don't say kaddish. So it's interesting that Rafogelman ends with that, but I think his general point is, like, even though if you as an individual haven't heard about the death of a relative, don't give up, right? I think he's saying like, or maybe don't say, and maybe don't say kaddish. That's also not so clear. Again, so if this, with respect to this general, this city was wiped out, right? Which he told us, if you hear in general, that God forbid your parents' city was wiped out. So on the one hand, okay, choose a day to commemorate this Yahrtzeit, but also no, it may not be, right? It could be that that your parent is still alive. Okay. Yeah. Right. Correct. Right. 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 Correct. 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 You can't. You can't. Right. Correct. Correct. Right. Correct. Oh, so you think of the Mayareal saying that making that point also? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. No, you're right. You're right. You're right. Correct. Correct. Right, so the Mayareal is making. So I agree. The Mayareal is making the same point in the Matamosha. Right. That if you're gonna that you can't come. An individual can't come and start saying Kaddish and uproots the person who definitely has to say Kaddish on that day. Correct. Okay, good. Very good. Yes, I did not read that correctly. Good. Okay, so it's 10:51. Okay, so let's quickly. I just want to make one point in the Minchas Yitzchak. Okay, so Minchas Yitzchak again is Rav Yitzchak Yaakov Weiss, who was born in Hungary in 1902. He's probably best known for being the head of the Eida Charedis, which he was starting in 1970 in Yerushalayim. He was also rabbi in Hungary, Romania, and England before coming to Israel to take on the head of the Eida Charedis. And again, he has a similar question. It's similar in a sense. Here he has a question. Let's say again, God forbid, someone's lost both parents and you don't know which day. So should you choose the same day for both parents or different days for both parents? Okay. So at the end of the end of the shuva, so the answer is you should choose different days because both parents deserve their own day. It's part of kibbut avim. If you know that both parents were lost on the same day, so okay, so then you don't have a choice. So then the Yahrtzeit is obviously on the same day. But if you don't know, so then 2 different days should be chosen. But before that, he deals with this question. Okay, what do you do when you don't know what day to choose? And again, he quotes the Mata Moshe, and that's basically the end. Right? Choose the day. You choose a day. In the middle, though, in this part Aleph, he notes as follows, similar to what Rav Fogelman was, similar to this Rav Hillel that Rav Fogelman quoted. He says, hold on a second, maybe you shouldn't eat steak Kaddish at all. Okay? Why should you not eat steak Kaddish at all? Because he said, if you believe that Kaddish is in order to help the person who passed away, in order for them to gain repentance. So the people killed in the Holocaust, they don't need repentance, right? They're kedoshim. So what do you take Kaddish for, right? So forget it. What do you need Yahrtzeit for? Okay, so he says it, and then he says, but doesn't quite work. Again, it's nice drash, but he says, in fact, the poskim use it the opposite way. Right? So the poskim, what the poskim use that exact point for is to say, let's say you have a guy who God forbid perished in the Holocaust, and he was a Russia. We know he was a Russia. Okay? He was unquestionably a Russia. And then he was killed in the Holocaust. So you might say, if the person had died a natural death, you wouldn't have sat shiva for him. The guy was such a Russia. You wouldn't have sat shiva for him at all. You would have no availus. Okay, but because he was killed in the Holocaust, al Kiddush Hashem, so then all of availus applies. And you do say Kaddish. Okay, so he says, all right, you like it, Ira? Ira likes it. Okay, so so that's so at the end of the day, then therefore you should choose, even though obviously people killed in the Holocaust, anyone killed, doesn't have to be the Holocaust, anyone killed al Kiddush Hashem is considered on the highest level, and is considered a righteous individual, and certainly doesn't need our help in terms of repentance or anything else. Nonetheless, we do say Kaddish, and even if God forbid the person wasn't such a upstanding individual, we still say Kaddish, and therefore it is proper to commemorate a day of Yahrtzeit for such an individual as well. Okay, so that's what the Minchas Yisra says. So just again, I thought it was very, very interesting that the Responsa on the committee on Responsa do come up with the same answer as Rav Mordechai Fogelman. There's no reason whatsoever to think that they had any communications between them, but we see that they did come up with the same suggestion as to when to keep a Yahrtzeit when you don't know the day of that. Okay, so again, it is Memorial Day, and obviously our task today is to remember the brave men and women of the United States military who've given their lives for what we're able to enjoy, even though it's been a very difficult year for us here in the United States, for obviously for COVID and for unfortunately rise in anti-Semitism that we've seen recently. That should in no way take away from what our servicemen and women have done and are continuing to do, and it is certainly appropriate to remember them on this day. So with that, thank you all for coming. I'm glad we have the chance to be outside, and hopefully we will be inside or somewhat close to inside on